This is Battlefield 2042's Season 1 0 Hour, but after playing this exclusively behind closed doors, a better fitting phrase probably would have been zero content. And whilst that might sound harsh to some people, I think it's thoroughly warranted, and Season 1, which DICE and EA probably thought was going to be a soft reboot for 2042, is nothing even close to that. Now, whilst there are some redeeming qualities to the content you're seeing, and some of it is genuinely quite good, but there simply isn't enough of it. And if you were somebody like myself who was waiting for 2042 to have its first initial release of content, this season is not going to be enough for you to return. Now, for a little context, I haven't really been covering Battlefield 2042, and the reason for that is that I was willing to accept the fact that the game hadn't released well and that it was in a bad place, and that I was going to give it some time to release Season 1 and see where they could get with the game. It's been 7 months, so I thought that would be adequate enough time, and unfortunately it isn't. In Season 1, you can expect 1 specialist, 2 helicopters, which are effectively the same helicopter but for each faction, 2 weapons, one of which is, dare I say it, questionably not really new, and 1 map. And that is literally it. There is of course a battle pass as well, which is going to be releasing cosmetic content, and the redesigns for Kaleidoscope, which don't even happen at the start of Season 1, but are allegedly happening I believe in late August. And that is it. That is all there is for Season 1. There is nothing happening for Hazard Zone because they've killed it off. There is nothing happening in Battlefield Portal beyond some extra logic functions, and they said that they're doing some sort of, custom vehicle superiority mode, but it's not new content. It's not brand new content. They're not adding new maps. They're not adding new vehicles. They're not adding new weapons. There is nothing happening on that front. And yes, there are quality of life improvements. There are improvements to the HUD. There are going to be improvements to the voice lines in the game, and general improvements to the game. But that's not the kind of thing that's going to drag people back to play 2042. I don't think many people care that the specialists will become less cringy. It's just something that shouldn't have been that way in the first place. And the start of Season 1 confirms that specialists, however they're going to handle them, are definitely staying in the game. They are legally obliged to provide 4 separate specialists, and because they've already said that before they sold the game, that's not going to change at all. So let's talk about the content, and the big one of course first is the map. And the map is super enjoyable. The map is called Exposure, and it's based in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. And this definitely feels more like a Battlefield 4 map than anything else released in 2042. And as part of the press briefing, they did generally say that they're committing to creating possibly smaller scale maps and trying to focus on creating Battlefield experiences as opposed to just jamming 128 players in. And Exposure feels good. There are definitely some questionable spawning locations in the early stages of Breakthrough, but the overall flow of the game, especially in the 64 player count, was fantastic, and this map is very unique in what it offers. It's super vertical, and the interior of the map, which is subterranean, feels a lot like Operation Locker, and the exterior of it feels a little bit like Demavan Peak. There are a bunch of zip lines and a bunch of ways to traverse the map, and this is primarily an infantry-only map. Now yes, there are vehicles like tanks and transports and helicopters, but these are just supplementary to what is effectively infantry gameplay. There are lots of places for infantry to hide, there are lots of ways for them to counter vehicles, and the general verticality of the map lends itself towards players who like to play in close quarters combat situations, and tend to avoid vehicles as well. This is no longer infantry farming simulator for every vehicle on the map. This played and flowed like a Battlefield 4 map, and it was really impressive. Visually, it's a good looking map. So far from what we played, it's actually quite fun to play as well, both in Breakthrough and in Conquest, and generally I would say, yeah, the map felt like an 8 out of 10. Now, I do have some concerns with the spawn placement of Breakthrough, because the first sector is extremely messy, and it seems as though it's not very well placed, so we'll see how that pans out. But as for the rest of it, it was a really solid experience. This is a different map, it offers something different, it has a flavor, and it has a very distinct vision for what it wants to be. So overall, I would say the map was the shining star of the content. I'd give it at least, again, a solid 8 out of 10, and I think those of you who are familiar with Battlefield maps of the past, you'll look at this map and go, yeah, that's a Battlefield map, it feels a bit different, and it's a bit of fun. This definitely feels like a map that was being developed whilst the feedback for 2042 was coming in, because there are parts of it where there isn't a lot of cover, and there are lots of parts of it where it feels like they've stacked cover to the brim. And that's a good thing, and it does feel good. It does feel like as an infantry player you can get a bit of flow going and move from cover to cover. Next up, let's talk about the weapons, and there are only 2 of them, which is hugely disappointing. I was probably expecting at least 4 to 6, and the biggest issue with these is not necessarily the weapons themselves, but the fact that they've decided to use these for Season 1 when they're more like Season 4 kind of weapons. We're getting a Crossbow and an AS VAL, which is the DMR variant of the AS VAL. And whilst I was actually quite impressed with the AS VAL in terms of how it performs, and in terms of its potential and customization value, these aren't Season 1 weapons. You know, they're not going to improve the overall feel of the game. We only have 2 machine guns in Battlefield 2042 right now, and a few options for SMGs, ARs, and DMRs, so why were these the choice? They're so obscure and so questionable. Now, yes, they are fun to use. The Crossbow especially is a good laugh. Some people are definitely not going to be happy about being one-shot by a crossbow at close range, but the fact that it has both explosive bolts, a rapid-fire bolt, and a long-range high-damage bolt is pretty cool to me, and I felt like it was a fun thing to use, and I had a good time with it, and it definitely brought back some memories from the Battlefield 3 days. So yeah, an okay addition, very questionable as to why they would use this for Season 1. The Crossbow, in my opinion, is something you should just randomly add to the game. It shouldn't be a dedicated weapon for a dedicated season. And then we have the AS VAL, or the DMR variant of the AS VAL. And at first I was like, well, you have an AS VAL already in Battlefield Portals, so what is this and why are you using it? And the answer is 2 things. One, it probably was pretty easy for them to throw that weapon into the regular game, and 2, it actually was surprisingly a good addition. Now, the AS VAL is the DMR variant, and if you actually use the high power rounds combined with the long suppressor and the long range optics, you do get a really enjoyable DMR experience. But you can also completely redesign it and use it as a close range fully automatic weapon. So yes, it is an AS VAL, and yes, it doesn't necessarily feel completely new, but I do appreciate the fact that it's very customizable, has a number of different playstyles, and kind of represents what the customization should have been for 2042 in the first place. It's a weapon that you can use in about 3 or 4 different ways, and I think many of us expected that to be the case with the Plus system, but that never really ended up being the case. So only 2 weapons, which is not great, and honestly nowhere near enough content, but at least one of them is actually a solid addition to the game. The other one is, you know, it's a crossbow. You might use it, you probably won't. For the vehicles, there are 2 stealth helicopters, one for each faction, and ultimately these switch from effectively being full-blown attack helicopters into a more traversable, more fast-moving variant of a helicopter that's supposed to be undetectable. Now, in stealth mode, you can't lock onto this thing, you can't spot it, and even the gunner in these vehicles has a suppressed heavy machine gun. This is a full-blown stealth vehicle, and it won't appear on the map, and it will be able to creep up behind you and lay down some fire with various cannons. It even has a bombing mode in the stealth option, and is a very versatile and very fast-moving aerial vehicle, so if you're somebody into helicopters, this is a cool addition to the game. But again, those are the only 2 vehicles being added to the game, and they are effectively just the same vehicle but in slightly different variants for each faction. And then there is Liz, and this is the new specialist which they've added, and there's only one in Season 1. Nobody wants specialists in the first place, so there's a lot of questions around that. But what we've got here is effectively a specialist who can utilize a tow missile, which recharges. You get 2 shots initially, with it recharging every 30 seconds or so to give you effectively an unlimited ATGM. Now, if you've used the tow missile in Battlefield 4, it's a fairly similar system. You fire it, you can control the tow missile, and it has a range of 450 meters. Now, everybody was pretty much using Liz in this capture session, and I think it's it's definitely going to be a problem, that's for sure. This character is capable of two-shotting attack helicopters. I imagine it's a one or two shot on jets as well. It can four-shot a tank, which means that you'd need effectively two of the specialists to take out one heavy tank. Although if you get some critical hits in there, you might be able to take it out faster. And other heavy armored vehicles like the heavy transport helicopters tend to be in the range of 3 to 4 shots with this rocket launcher. But then you realize that this thing has a range of 450 meters, meaning that you can comfortably stand in the middle of nowhere with no direct line of sight to any vehicle and start deleting them from range. If there is an entire squad of this specialist, they could effectively delete pretty much every armored vehicle on the map whenever they want to. You do get a warning indicator for the missile when it comes in both in tanks and helicopters, but it's very difficult to outmaneuver them, and they do have a long range. There are instances where I've missed a helicopter, looped the ATGM back round, and then hit it again. Now you might be wondering, well, how does this go for infantry? And, I mean, it's wait and see. I don't know what it's going to be like when it hits the general population, but the ATGM is a one-shot if it's a direct hit to an infantry player, or does about 60, I would say, damage, splash damage, if you land close to the feet. It doesn't have a huge amount of splash damage. I've had one detonate effectively right next to me and only do like 10 or 20 damage. But if you get it super close to the player, you're looking at least half their health gone. But if you do hit them directly, it's basically a UCAV. So if you're somebody who is looking forward to using this new stealth helicopter, good luck, because I mean, I think I got hit within like 2 minutes of being in the air, and I think the first hit did like 60 damage and the second hit finished me off. And I obviously lost a lot of mobility from the first initial hit anyway. Now, I do believe there won't be a huge amount of people running this specialist because a wingsuit on a mountainous map is definitely something you're going to want to use, but if a whole squad gets together and decides to use these ATGMs, vehicles may as well not even bother playing. And once again, nobody wants specialists, nobody wants them in the game, that's already been established, and I think the most unfortunate part of this is either the specialists are really good and you have to use them, or they're completely useless and nobody's going to use them. And that's always been the problem with using specialists. They either have to be actually something that's fun and enjoyable to use, or they're pointless, or completely pointless and then there was no point. I think tanks will suffer a little bit less because it will require two of these specialists working together to take them out, but if you're an attack helicopter, I would be in severe amounts of panic. And that's it. So we have one map, two questionable weapons, a specialist which poses a number of balance questions for 2042 once again. We've had specialists who do armor plates, that was already a question. Now we've got a specialist who can use an ATGM from super long range, which is already another question. And there is no Battlefield Portal content coming at all beyond a dedicated air superiority mode. No new content for Portal, Hazard Zone has been binned off. And the redesigns for Kaleidoscope are not happening until later in the season. The map was like an 8 out of 10, the weapons in my opinion are about a 4 or a 5, and unfortunately there aren't many of them, there's only 2, and the specialist, I don't even want specialist to be a thing, so I don't even think it's worth giving that a numerical value. And I've got to say on the whole, I was really disappointed. Now contextually, if you're somebody who already plays 2042, and you're content with the game as it is, this is a nice content update. But if you're somebody like me who is waiting for a reason to return and expecting Season 1 to be a soft reboot, it's not even close to that. It's not even in that realm, and I think it's incredibly disappointing that in 7 months this was all that was produced. One map, 2 weapons, 2 vehicles, and a bunch of cosmetics for a battle pass that nobody's going to care about because the game isn't in a good place. Now yes, I appreciate that 2042 had a difficult launch, and I appreciate that it had to take on lots of feedback, it had to work on all these redesigns, it had to change lots of quality of life changes, it had to do a lot of things, and it's still going to have to do a lot of things in Season 1 with the release of new content and with the release of redesigned content. But that doesn't change the fact that this is a super disappointing update, which may as well be called zero content. I know that sounds like a joke, but it feels that way. 7 months to get one map is incredibly disappointing for most AAA shooters. You know, if you look around the rest of the industry and you look around how FPS games and live service titles are working, you know, this minimal amount of content on a AAA paid game is so far behind the rest of the industry. It's almost embarrassing to an extent. And ultimately, EA and DICE are missing the target again. Nobody is going to return to 2042 because you made the Specialist less cringy, or because you redesigned some of the initial maps, but they will return for new content. And whilst yes, I think those redesigns are a good idea, the fact that they've taken as long as they have is insane. It blows my mind, in my opinion. I understand that there has to be testing and feedback and trialing out how these new designs work. But in context of the rest of the industry, and in context of how much content people are expecting within a 7-month window, and technically a 9-month window if Season 1 is lasting 2 months, it's absolutely nowhere near enough. Now, the map is a super redeeming quality to this, because it feels as though the direction for future content is definitely going in the right direction. But 2 weapons, 1 specialist which people don't even want to be a thing, 0 portal content, and 2 vehicles. That is poor. That is genuinely poor for 7 months. And I keep contextualizing this in terms of the rest of the industry. When you look at your other first-person shooters, you know, your other live service titles, your other battle royales, your other games that are trying to push as much content as possible. But even in the context of past Battlefield games, this is nowhere near enough. Battlefield 4, which had an equally challenging launch with bugs, glitches, and other problems, within this period of time had China Rising release, Second Assault, Naval Strike, and by July, you had the introduction of Dragon's Teeth as well. 4 separate expansion packs with multiple maps, multiple weapons, multiple vehicles, multiple cosmetics within a 7 to 8 month period. Even Battlefield 3 way back when had the release of Back to Karkand in December and Close Quarters in June, and it was September where we saw Armored Kill. So 2 expansion packs and a 3rd one shortly following afterward. In the context of even its own franchise, Season 1 of 2042 is nowhere near enough. And in the harshest possible terms, this feels like minimal amounts of content that they've strapped to a game which is only just now basically leaving early access. That's about it for this video on Season 1, and apologies that some of the footage was reused in the background. I actually run into a couple of capture issues whilst we were at this event. And I think overall, if you're somebody who, again, already plays Battlefield, you'll like this update. It'll be a nice addition if you're somebody who's already in the game. But if you're waiting, I think you're going to continue waiting for Season 2. So that's it, folks. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like, and I'll catch you again in the next one.